Thank you for joining us. 3 Israeli Palestinians have been killed after an attack near one of Islam's holiest sites in the old city of Jerusalem. 2 Israeli police officers were critically wounded and later died in hospital. The 3 Israeli Palestinians reportedly opened fire at a gate near the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. Let's go straight to Al Jazeera's Harry Fawcett, who is in occupied East Jerusalem for us. Harry, it was a very confusing situation earlier. What more do we know and what's the latest?
Well, we know from the Israeli police that this took place. The initial shots were fired at around 7 a.m. this morning local time, so about 6 hours ago, at, as you say, one of the holiest sites in the world for Islam, the holiest site in the world for Judaism. The Temple Mount, as it's known to Jews, the Haram al-Sharif, the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, as it's known to Muslims. 3 Palestinian Israeli attackers, according to police, opened fire, and they were then shot and killed by the security forces nearby. I'm joined by a spokesman for the Israeli police, Mickey Rosenfeld. As we've been hearing, there has been some confusion about the way that events played out. What is your latest appreciation of the narrative of all this?
As part of the ongoing investigation into the attack, what we know is that 7 minutes past 7, shots were fired where our police officers saw clearly 3 individuals, 3 terrorists at the entrance of one of the areas of the Temple Mount. Shots were fired in return by our police officers who identified the danger and realized there was a life-threatening situation. All 3 terrorists were shot when they were armed. There were 2 automatic weapons and 1 knife. The security measures are continuing in and around the area of the Temple Mount in order to make sure that it is secure and there is no further threat. And heightened security is continuing also in Jerusalem in general.
Now, one of the measures that's been taken is the entire shutdown of the compound, cancellation of Friday prayers for Muslims for the first time in many, many years. This is a huge step that's been decided on, potentially consequences of that in terms of tens of thousands of people who are preparing to come for worship on this day. I mean, what kind of consequences are there potentially from that?
Well, first of all, we're taking in consideration the security issues, which is to make sure that there is no further issues and security threats on the Temple Mount itself. So our police officers are in and around the area of the Temple Mount, patrolling the Temple Mount. At the same time, a security decision was made that there'll be no prayers on the Temple Mount, and that will continue as long as necessary. We have to take into consideration and understand that 3 terrorists came in to the Temple Mount this morning, planned the attack ahead of time. All 3 terrorists were identified. We know they came in from the area where they lived, which is al-Fahim in the north of Israel. And unfortunately, the tragic result being that 2 police officers were murdered when they were guarding the respectable and holy site for Muslims as well as Jews to come and visit on.
The police have also gone in and arrested members of the Waqf committee, the Waqf group, the management body which looks after the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. Again, that's a pretty big step to arrest people involved in the management of the mosque, correct?
Well, immediately after the attack, as part of the ongoing investigation, anyone who was in and around the area of the Temple Mount was immediately questioned. That's a standard procedure at the moment. We're making sure that the security level in and around the old city is continuing. And at the same time, of course, Israel and the different government agencies are working together closely on a political level in order to make sure that the situation stays calm and quiet. And our emphasis is security measures only. That's the only reason why the Temple Mount at the moment is continuing to be closed and that no one is allowed to pray this specific Friday on the Temple Mount. That will continue as long as necessary in terms of the security assessments.
Nonetheless, one of those politicians that you're talking about, the public security minister, has talked about red lines being crossed because of the location of this shootout. What does that mean? He's talking as well about a security provisions review of how things operate in and around this site. I mean, again, that will be concerning to many Muslims who come here every Friday.
Well, this type of attack taking place in Jerusalem is unacceptable. There's no differentiation whether it's at the Jaffa Gate or at the Damascus Gate, where we've seen more than 12 attacks that have taken place, where in fact last month we also lost a border police woman who was murdered and stabbed to death. Our security measures are absolutely essential to make sure that the 3 different areas inside the Jerusalem's walls of the old city, the Temple Mount, the Western Wall, and the Church of the Sepulchre, are kept safe. That's why we have more than 360 CCTV cameras watching each different area. But this morning, there was no specific intelligence that we received about an attack taking place. As far as we're concerned, we have to try and make sure that we get to further individuals that are trying to plan attacks. And what the Minister of Public Security was referring to is absolutely essential to make sure that the holy site both to Muslims as well as Jews, is protected, and it's our responsibility to make sure there's no further attacks.
Okay, Mickey Rosenfeld, thank you very much for joining us. And so the investigation continues. As Mr. Rosenfeld was saying, these are 3 men from northern Israel, Palestinian Israelis, apparently not on the security watch list, not under any kind of monitoring. And so their role, the motivations, the security situation around their involvement will obviously be key to this investigation as it goes forward. But there will also be a lot of issues around access to this holiest site for both Jews and Muslims, which will be raised and potentially will be cause for concern in the coming days.